the point of the myth of corporate efficiency is that large corporations are very labor efficient, which means they get more product and more profit with less labor. And labor efficiency does not benefit the society. It leaves people unemployed. Labor efficiency is matched, is more important the more you tax it. So you put labor to use by not taxing it. The more you tax labor, the more they avoid hiring people, because the cost has to either be taken out of what labor gets, or it has to be added to what the employer pays. With land, it's just the opposite. The less you tax it, the more the land is held idle. So there's no tax cost. This is land in Philadelphia. There's no tax cost, or not a significant tax cost, to holding this land vacant. So the land tax emphasizes labor, or emphasizes land efficiency and natural resource efficiency. And the taxes that are on labor, which are income taxes, but also sales taxes, because sales taxes reduce the purchasing power of the worker. They make production more expensive, and they make hiring people more expensive. Now, what I mean by land value tax is, at the top box, that's conventional property tax. So conventional property tax is very high on a well-improved property, very low on a blighted, run-down property. And a land value tax is the same no matter what condition your property's in. And if it was a vacant lot like that one we just pictured, the taxes on land would be even lower under a property tax, but they'd still be the same under a land value tax. This is a big part of why classical liberals all advocated land value tax, that they argued that it was the most pro-development, the most pro-economic, and some of them argued it on a justice issue. Jefferson and Paine especially argued that it was unjust to allow people to grab up land and sit on it while other people were deprived of land. And Ben Franklin, he said manufacturers are founded in poverty. It's the poor without land who will work for low wages or starve, and that allows large interests to profit from manufacturing. Without that, he says no man who can have land of his own is going to be poor enough to want to work for somebody else, or certainly for a big business. So I think it's a bit of an overstatement, because some things are just more efficient with some employees. A craftsman will hire an apprentice, and the apprentice will work for him for a while until maybe he's ready to be a craftsman himself. So it's not really true that nobody would work for an employer, but you wouldn't have that system you have now. So with all the economists and all the classical liberals and all the American founding fathers who actually spoke on it, saying that that we should tax land value, the question is why we don't. And this cartoon, it's the Wizard of Id, and the king is saying, we need more money for the treasury. Why don't we raise the property tax? And the next thing, he's in the dungeon. I forgot that the little Fink is the largest landowner in the kingdom. Now, it turns out that when kings were in charge, we did get most of our revenue from taxes on land value. It's when the landlords when Parliament became powerful. So here we have, this is Richard Cobden, who was a land taxer and a free trader. And he noted that even after William the Conqueror, which is 1066, the land rent paid 100% of the revenue. So the king would get land from the landlords would get land from the small landholders, and the taxes went way up under William the Conqueror. This was true as a percentage. This was true even before William the Conqueror, but the taxes were low, and it was after we had more of a centralized empire that the taxes became higher. But at 1216, which is right after the Magna Carta, the landlords began to find ways of shifting the taxes onto the merchants, onto the peasants, and off of themselves. And this is also the time the enclosure acts began, that they began enclosing land, pushing the peasants off of the land, and that drove the rent up, because when there's lots of land, the rent is low. But when you can hold land out of use, the rent on the remaining land gets higher. This is the difference between natural rent and rack rent. And William Godwin complained about this too in Inquiry Concerning Political Justice. But what this did was it made land efficiency unimportant, because you could hold the land vacant, it didn't matter. As the land value is going up, it's really not costing you if you're rich enough.
Dan,
Yep.
Daniel asked, shouldn't some of the natural person rights be clawed back from corporate personhood, or at least liability be reasserted for the investors?
Yeah, and I don't know about to the investors. It should, but that's kind of a different thing. The main thing is that the corporations are only profitable in the first place because we put the taxes on people rather than on land. And so what we have now, this was under feudalism. What we have now is a kind of corporate feudalism, where large corporations hold all the land. They put the taxes on ordinary people who are productive. Now, if you look at this tractor, this is very labor efficient. You have this huge acreage of land, and you only have one guy on a tractor. And it's not very land efficient. For one thing, all those wheels, when you use this tractor, at the very beginning, it doesn't matter much, because it looks like he's just he's just digging up the ground. But as the time goes on and you do things with a very large tractor, you end up crushing part of your crops. This is how they irrigate fields. This is called center pivot irrigation. There's a well or a pipeline in the center of the field, and this thing, which is automated, so there's no labor at all, except the person who occasionally comes to repair it or figure out what's wrong. This thing goes around in a giant circle, and this, from the aerial view, these circles look like this. And if you'll see, some of the land is vacant. This is a tomato picker. I think they made this for the I think they made this to promote the tomato business, because all the tomatoes are red. When these tomato pickers, when people machine pick, a third of the tomatoes are so hard and green that you can't use them, or they end up being used in ketchup. And a third of them can be sorted and sold and used for food or spaghetti sauce or whatever. And a third of them are rotten. But it's very labor efficient. You lose a lot of tomatoes, but you have two people, the one guy you see operating the machinery and the other guy pulling the wagon. And I'm sure they'll figure out a way to let one person do both. But this is how mechanized farming works. This is hand-picked tomatoes using migrant workers. Migrant workers are very poorly paid. They are they are rushed and forced to do backbreaking work. They're paid by the pound of usable tomatoes. So when they haul them somewhere, somebody sorts through them and they only get paid for the ones that were usable. But they are better tomatoes than the machine picked tomatoes. And this is mostly what migrant workers for. We get a lot of tomatoes from Mexico because they're paid less, but it's a better tomato. Again, the emphasis is on labor efficiency, but it's less labor efficient than the machine picked tomatoes. The way that's the most land efficient is for small farmers. This one is using a greenhouse, but you can do it outdoors as well. For small farmers, you know, she's not as rushed. She probably is a relative of the owner of the farm. And she is picking the tomatoes herself, hauling it to the local produce place, or selling it on a roadside stand, or selling it to a local grocer. This is the way farming used to be before we had a massive transportation subsidy. One of the reasons giant corporations are more efficient, that I don't get into much with these slides, is that we have subsidized interstate highways and other forms of transportation to make those large corporations more competitive, because we have subsidized distribution costs. These people would tend to be more local, and you would still get your bananas and coconuts and avocados shipped into the north, but you would not get tomatoes shipped in unless it was completely out of season. So you might get tomatoes from South America when it's their summer. This is this is a small organic farm. You can see that it's very intensively used. It's also a higher value food. So these high value foods are eaten by human beings and are much healthier, and they require a lot more work, and they are much more expensive than they need to be, because the taxes add to the cost of hiring human beings. This is the same kind of thing, very intensive land use inside with a greenhouse, which extends growing season in the north. But it's, again, it takes a lot of labor to do this. When we get into livestock, we see that this is a little bit of a blurry picture, but this is a chicken factory. And let me see if the bottom of the screen doesn't quite show. I can't fix that. But basically what happens is, you see at the bottom, there are eggs that roll out of this. This is very automated to be extremely labor efficient. Now you might say this is also land efficient. Look at all those chickens on that little bit of land. But those chickens are fed by imported feed, which brings us back to this tractor guy, because the tractor guy is providing chicken feed. I mean, the big Iowa corn farmers and stuff, they are growing livestock crops. They're growing feed for beef, cattle, pork, chicken, whatever. Again, the small farm, this is how the chickens are on a small family farm. My first wife grew up on a farm, and it's a lot more work to have true free range chickens. And the reason it's more work is that every morning is an Easter egg hunt. About half the chickens will go into, they still have those things where the chickens roost and the eggs roll out the bottom. And about half the chickens voluntarily do that. They climb up, and there's a little nest in the machine, and they go up and they lay their egg there, and the egg rolls out the bottom. But the other half will nest in the tall grass. And so there's a great deal of labor efficiency in having that corporate farm over having a small farm like this. And there's in between, there's places that, but if they're free range chickens, then every day the workers go out, and the workers are usually the children of the farm owner, because these are mostly family farms that do it this way. And they go out and gather the eggs. They handle it. Now, corporations, now you'll see something that says free range chicken, and it's promoted by a corporation. This is their idea of a free range chicken. They've removed the individual cages. So the chickens are free to range around inside this giant chicken factory, but they're still just crowded into the factory.
We have another comment from Daniel. He said
Uh-huh.
groundwater health and microbial biodiversity in soils, soil health would be another important commons that Georges would also could also address.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in about 2 more slides.
Okay.
Okay. The same thing is true. These pigs are wallowing in their own filth. They've, for as long as they've been big enough to be in these cages, they've never turned around. You know, they all get pointed in the same direction so they can be fed easily. The farm hands hose them down from time to time. Again, if you have a local tax, you know, these are fed by this guy. But the problem with these factory farms and with land value taxes, if it's a local land value tax, you're not taxing that guy. You're only taxing this guy, and he's got an improved place, and he's got very little land. It's all crowded into this one factory. But if you start taxing pollution, this is the effluent from a pig factory. And the effluent from a chicken factory is not as bad, but it's similar. This effluent is held in containment ponds, usually. Every once in a while they leak and cause a huge disaster. But this is pollution. And the argument for a land value tax is also the argument for a pollution tax. So when you pollute, you're using the commons, right? When you take land out of the commons for yourself, you're depriving everybody else of access to that land. When you pollute into the air and water that is everybody's commons, you're degrading the air and water for everybody else. And so it makes sense to put a big chunk of the taxes on pollutants. And that would also make this less profitable and would make the family farm, even with livestock, even with pigs and chickens and beef, more profitable. Now, the militant vegans don't think we should be raising livestock at all. As an economist, I think it's just as good if we have half as much beef and have half as much meat eating by all of the people as if we have no meat eating by half of the people. So you can feel righteous by not eating any meat, but if we all ate less meat, it would have an advantage. And if the livestock got to live a good and decent life until that time when they're killed, that's much better than the livestock being crowded in like this. So in terms of like the animal rights aspect of it, it's a major improvement to go back to family farms. There's also, on her farm, they had cattle. They had a small number of cattle. They mostly raised sweet corn, which was very popular, and people would come looking for their sweet corn. But they would switch. So for a couple years, the cattle would be refertilizing the pasture in one area, and they would be growing corn in the other. And then they would move the cattle over to the corn side and grow the corn where the cattle was. So there was a constant fertilization, and that's the holistic way to raise cattle, is that your cattle, I mean, this is here, this livestock, they're dumping the fertility into this swamp, which will ultimately find its way into rivers and lakes and stuff, no matter how they try to contain it. But the people who put it directly back into the ground don't have this problem, and it's healthier for the vegetables. In general, there wouldn't be a concentration on cattle raising except on ground that was too, there are areas that are too semi-arid for crops, and so cattle range there, and that tends to work. They're using the least valuable land. Part of it is beef farming is well, livestock farming is not very land efficient generally, but the factory farms, because they're polluting, would be gotten rid of. Now I want to move away from farming, because this corporate efficiency myth applies to all aspects of corporate efficiency. This is those two white roof buildings. The one at the bottom is Walmart, and the one at the top is a Sam's Club. And this is in a big tax subsidized development, but they ended up selling off the land after they put in all the special roads to it. And you see that they have a huge parking lot. And the parking lot, partly they have these huge parking lots because zoning laws require everybody to have big parking lots. But partly Walmart is self-service. So you go into these parking lots and you're in there for a long time, because whatever you want to get, you have to find it yourself. There's very little customer service in big stores. Big corporations, in order to be labor efficient, have as few employees as humanly possible, and you as a customer are doing the work. Now, you as a customer doing the work are not generating any payroll taxes, because what you're doing is not paying you money, it's just saving you money. And that means your sales taxes are even lower. If your price is lower, your sales tax is lower. That magnifies the advantage of the price being lower. And this is only worth doing because the taxes, I would rather pay more money and not waste as much time wandering around in that Walmart. But the tax cost of having somebody help me with my shopping is so high that we tend to do it this way. Now that Walmart is not only, again, this is the same two buildings. It's not only on prime land, but it's on the intersection of two major highways, Route 60 and 2230, which is the Lincoln Highway, and the William Penn, the Interstate 376. So this is a major intersection. And because land value is not taxed very heavily, and productivity is, we build this major intersection. People grab up the land and put it to very non-intensive uses. If you're going to build a highway like that, there should be a whole town there. There should be high-rise buildings, there should be apartment buildings, there should be housing, there should be a bunch of stuff, and people should be able to walk to their merchants. Nobody walks to any of this. You cannot walk. There are, I didn't clip them, but they are not very far from residential complexes, but there are barriers. There is no way to get to any of this except by automobile. And that's part of the insane urban design that caters to the mentality of large corporations. They are competing, Walmart is competing with supermarkets, and supermarkets are competing with small grocers. And small grocers are the most land efficient of all, but they are not at all labor efficient. So when you go into, this is Donatelli's Italian Food Center. This is in Bloomfield, Pennsylvania, or Bloomfield neighborhood of Pittsburgh. which we call Little Italy, and there are 2 Italian markets. There's one around the corner from this one. And it's very land efficient. Things are crowded into this thing. And you can barely see the guy off to the right. He is preparing something for this guy. When I go into Donatelli's, sometimes it's very crowded at lunch rush and stuff. But in general, there are almost as many employees as customers in that Donatelli. Whereas when you go into Walmart or Home Depot or any of the big box stores, the customers usually outnumber the employees by 5 to 1, 10 to 1. And the customers even do their own checkout. They have self-checkout now. It's all to reduce labor. None of it is to reduce land efficiency. Part of the reason that Walmart has so many parked cars is that you're in there for a long time. You go into Donatelli's, they get it to you, they bring you out, you're out the door. It takes almost no time at all. This is a Home Depot. Now, in addition to taking up a lot of land, this Home Depot is also in Pittsburgh. I'm using my examples from Pittsburgh because that's just what I know. This Home Depot got a 10-year tax abatement to build there. And the year they got their tax abatement, there were 17 hardware stores within a 2.5-mile radius of Home Depot. 10 years later, when their tax abatement finally ended, there were 0. They had destroyed all of the hardware stores within a 2.5-mile radius. All 17 of them had lost their business because of this subsidized Home Depot. Now, small business doesn't get subsidies because they don't have, large corporations have people that's their only job is to go around looking for somebody that'll give them a subsidy. And they found this neighborhood they were worried it was distressed. They wanted to have some development here, so they gave a big development. Now, Paul Lumber is not a hardware store. They're still in business. They are about 1.5 miles from Home Depot, and they are very land efficient. They have a tiny parking lot in the back that you can't see, but they mostly have very good service. And this is the same thing from the other end. There's a small parking lot, and there's also a little bit of parking behind it. And in that one area, that's where they hand you the lumber. I called Home Depot once, many years ago, for a sledgehammer, and it took me 20 minutes. I was put on hold. I finally got them, and they said, sledgehammers are, $18. And then I called Paul Lumber, and I got an immediate answer, and the guy said, well, what kind of what size sledgehammer do you need? And I said, there's sizes? Yes. So they come in 3 sizes, and it's like a 2-pound, 2.5-pound, 3-pound or something. And I said, I don't know. He said, well, what are you going to do with it? I said, I have to drive this giant rod into the ground for the electric. And he said, well, we usually use the heaviest one. Or, people usually use the heaviest one for that.
Dan, I have a question for you
Uh-huh.
from Gist. Dan, there's a difference between efficiency and profitability. Stiglitz emphasizes market
Right.
power.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that they are profitable even though they are not efficient. And they're profitable because they are labor efficient, and all the taxes are on labor. Okay. And if the taxes were on land value, this would be more profitable. Now, Home Depot has computers. They have stores that are earmarked as computerized investigation stores. When I called Home Depot and asked for the price of a sledgehammer, if my store was a computer investigation store, they would log in. They know how many people ask about the prices of different things. and they make sure those prices are low. So plywood is cheap at Home Depot. 2x4s are cheap at Home Depot. But molding, you can't call in and say how much is molding because you don't know what the molding is called. You have to bring in a piece. And so nobody price shops molding. So molding that was 16 cents a foot at Paul Lumber was 26 cents a foot at Home Depot.
Got another comment, Dan.
Well, wait till I finish this point.
Okay.
Come on, brain. The other thing of it is when I found out, not only did I get expert advice on what sledgehammer I needed, but when I went to Paul Lumber, I walked in the door and I said, "Where are your sledgehammers?" And there were 5 people behind phones on the front counter. And one of them said, "Are you the guy that called?" And I said, "Yeah." And he got up and he walked me to the sledgehammer. When you go to buy something at Home Depot, again, you as the customer are doing the work. You load your own lumber onto a cart. You push your own lumber to check out. They check you out. You push your own lumber out to the parking lot. You load your own lumber into your car or pickup truck. When you buy lumber at Paul Lumber, this is not a good picture because it was just the Google Earth camera was driving past the open thing. But Paul Lumber has the lumber stacked up on balconies. So some of it's down on the ground floor, some of it's on a balcony. When you buy lumber at Paul Lumber, they hand you a receipt. You go in there. They pull the lumber. One employee pulls the lumber down. The other employee catches it. Then they load your truck for you or load your car for you. And this is service. This is what small business does. And service requires labor. And so they are at a disadvantage because we put all the taxes on them. This is why Home Depot is more profitable than Paul Lumber, even though they are less efficient.
All right. Daniel had a comment.
Yes.
Another efficiency consideration is the way deliveries of goods to the small mom and pop store occurs versus large aggregate deliveries to deliver to the inventory of the big box store.
Yes, and that's true. And Amazon is even more true. And that's partly because we don't tax fuel. We should, fuel is an extraction from the commons, coal and oil and well, gasoline is refined oil. And we don't have a high enough tax on the extraction of oil. We also don't have a high tax on the production of pollution. So transportation is artificially subsidized, and the interstates artificially subsidize it. And even the customer's fuel is, if the customer's fuel was taxed, you wouldn't drive, that Walmart is drawing people from a very large area, and they're all burning fuel to get there. And that neighborhood store is drawing people from a very short distance. So they're not using much fuel or any fuel if they walk or ride a bicycle to get there. So there's that efficiency, but also the delivery. I will get into the delivery in a bit.
Are you going to talk about the quote home shoppers that are now in everywhere because of the virus? And that
I wasn't planning to, because this is not a virus specific talk, but
I'm talking about in general. Now people want to, even those of us who are healthy, but the idea of how efficient or inefficient is it? I think it's very inefficient.
Yeah, and the virus, the virus is destroying small businesses like crazy. In Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania sells essential home repair goods, you can also go to their garden shop, but the gardeners are shut down. So this is, the virus is just another excuse. You know, the corporate people make sure that that they're not hurt. They have the lobbyists to get the ear of people, but we do not. And I'm going to talk about distribution in a second, but right now I'm talking about retailers and service. And the service, small businesses advantage is service. Big businesses advantage is mostly price, and it's increased by the tax. Now, when we get into manufacturers, and this is where the distribution comes, U.S. Steel was a giant, is still a giant corporation. And in the early 1980s, 1980, 1981, they shut down most of their steel mills. And we bought our products from Japan. This was before China was a big deal. And they shut down their steel mills, but they didn't sell the land. And U.S. Steel still owns they own more coal than any other corporation in the United States, except for Consolidation Coal, which is a big trust that basically took over all the coal industry, all the small coal producers. And USX and Consolidation Coal have pretty much a monopoly on coal. USX has the most iron ore in the country, so they have a monopoly on iron ore. When they decided to shut down their mills, they bought up as much natural gas as they could find. So they have a semi-monopoly, and they bought Marathon Oil because Marathon Oil had been grabbing up natural gas reserves. And Gurney Birkenfeld, who's the real estate editor of Fortune, he did an article on Pittsburgh's land value tax, and I took him around for a couple weeks, and I got to eat at nice restaurants on his tab. But he told me that he interviewed the president of, it was either Ryerson Steel or Republic Steel. And he said, how do you manage to compete against these giants like U.S. Steel? And this president said, every night when I go to bed, I get down on my knees and I thank God for the utter incompetence of U.S. Steel. So these smaller competing companies are much more efficient. They were even more labor efficient, but they were much more resource efficient than U.S. Steel. And U.S. Steel still held the advantage because of their natural resource monopolies. Now we had the U.S. Steel building. It's the tallest building in Pittsburgh. It got a big tax break when Pittsburgh went to land value tax, and people said, why are you trying to play into the hands of U.S. Steel? But when we went to Clairton, U.S. Steel had almost shut down. They eventually modernized it, but they had 1,100 people in the Clairton Coke Works. The Clairton Coke Works don't smell as bad as they used to. They put in a lot of scrubbers, but the Clairton Coke Works was 40% of Clairton. And this other part that's this stuff that's clearly coal, residual coal coke junk is in Jefferson Borough. But all this is Clairton, and 40% of the land value is in the Clairton Coke Works. And so Clairton went to a land value tax, and U.S. Steel has responded by modernizing, increasing production, but they're also paying a lot of the tax. And the people of Clairton, 97% of the homeowners pay less, and a lot of them pay a lot less because of this. So when you get into, if we had land value tax generally, U.S. Steel would have to let go of its coal monopolies and its iron ore monopolies, and smaller companies could compete with them too. Now, when you're talking about a steel mill, you're not talking about, small for a steel mill is not like small for a grocery store. It still requires a degree of concentration. But the shipping costs are much greater when you have one steel mill shipping all over the country, or this is one coke works shipping long distances to other steel mills that burn coke. Our shipping costs are international, and we're looking now at trade with China, and we say, well, China is more efficient at producers. Well, they have lower labor costs because their labor is not well paid. They're better paid now. They were all starving before trade opened up with the rest of the world, but they're still way poorer than Americans are. But if we start with, let's say somebody in China is making something somewhere, and we'll pick a place at random, we'll say Wuhan, and they're making something in Wuhan and they're shipping it to the coast of China. Then they're shipping it all the way across the country. And I think I skipped one, because they're shipping it, not only they're shipping it to San Francisco, and then from there it's being shipped to either a central or a regional distributor. And then from there, or central or eastern distributor. From there, it's shipped to regional distributors all over the country. Now, and then from there, it's shipped to retailers. So that's a lot of shipping. And even if you're more efficient at making something, if let's say you're making a chest of drawers, well, there are craftsmen who could make chests of drawers, and they're more expensive because the craftsman's time is taxed and it's expensive. But a craftsman might have a little less production efficiency if he makes that chest of drawers in McKeesport, which is where I live, or in Butler, which is north of Pittsburgh, or in Pittsburgh. And the people in McKeesport might tend to buy their chest of drawers from somebody in McKeesport, not because they feel a patriotic duty toward them, but if transportation costs paid the taxes that were appropriate for the fact that you're sucking natural resources out of the air and generating pollution, this would be less efficient than buying local and distributing local. And this difference between taxes and between profitability and efficiency is all driven by regulation and by tax and by government spending. So here we have government spending on interstate highways, subsidizing harbor amenities, and in general, making this international type of trade cheaper, while it taxes the human beings who are making things locally and distributing them locally. And this, this is, now, if we get back to service, let's compare full service restaurants where there's lots of effort put into serving the people, lots of effort put into putting together the food. The food is more expensive. It should be more expensive, but it shouldn't be that much more expensive. The problem is that waiters' wages are taxed, the employer's profits are taxed, that fine building is taxed, everything is taxed. And they are competing with fast food. And we complain about fast food, but when you get right down to it, why is fast food more competitive? Well, partly because we're all in a hurry, but partly because these stores, there isn't much to the building. There's very few employees in there. You go into that restaurant, you grab, you wait for them to cook the food, they hand it, you take it back to the table yourself, or you eat in the car. Everything is done on the customer. So that, again, is the reason these things are more profitable. They're not really more efficient, because part of this supposed efficiency is that you have to hustle and you have to eat crap. It's not that they give you crap because they want to give you crap. It's because fried food is fast. You know, baked food is slow. They have some baked potatoes on reserve in some of these places. What's the Subway sandwiches is efficient, is a little bit healthier because they can do assembly line. They can put your salad together in an assembly line or stick it in a sandwich in an assembly line.
Dan, I have two comments. One
Okay.
from Daniel. I can't help but wonder if LVT is getting a bit dated. Would commons value tax be a more comprehensive concept to investigate / embrace? And then Fred Bovary commented, exclusively possessed land is not in the commons. So those are two comments.
Well, it's not legally in the commons. It is morally in the commons.
Okay. All right.
And so yeah, the law is on the side of the land monopolists who are corporate monopolists. Yeah, but when we talk about the commons, we have been reduced to think about parks and public roads, and we have a narrow view of the commons, which is no longer the view that under ancient common law, all land was commons. And the lord was, landlord did not mean landowner. Originally, landlord meant somebody chosen by the tribe, and eventually, as it morphed into feudalism, somebody chosen by the king or somebody with hereditary privilege who ruled over land. So the landlord ruled over land. The landlord didn't own land. And that gradually transitioned to the landlords claiming ownership of the land that their predecessors had ruled over. But now we see, a kind of corporate feudalism where these large corporations have all the same privileges that the feudal lords had, except that they can buy and sell as well. So anyhow, that's the main point about the efficiency issue. And I'm going to go stop the share and go back to love the way Dan says potato. Does somebody say potato? So that's, I'm looking at going through the questions. Market power is, see who that was. That, yeah, market power is part of the thing, and market power has to do with, or had to do, because it's a little different with the internet, but it's still, the internet still is a centralizing force. Amazon is doing great with the internet, and they're doing great with loopholes in the antitrust laws that we passed to prevent this kind of thing. They are getting around it. But market power, when the news media, when the TV and radio networks are monopolized, then big likes big. So if you have central corporations, if you have Bird's Eye Vegetables or Libby Vegetables, they want to sell, they want to make one sale to a grocery chain that has 200, 500 stores. When the local farmer sells vegetables, he doesn't have enough vegetables to supply 500 stores anyhow. So that small grocer is more likely to buy from a small farmer. And so what you end up with is a monopoly in one place networks out to monopolies in other places. Even if you can't identify any particular monopoly privilege with one link in the chain, those small grocers are going under because the small wholesalers have gone under. So
So IGA, what used to be IGA, which was actually a co-op of
yeah,
small grocery stores, and there are the private labels. They can switch off a label.
yeah.
It can be the
But
Kroger, it can be the
Pittsburgh
same
had
thing.
an area called the Strip District, which was the produce strip. And all the small restaurants, the small grocers, they would drive down there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would load up with vegetables. And, you know, the small grocer was the middleman. And the big corporations say, well, we've cut out the middlemen, but they haven't really, because the middleman is now internal to the corporation.
Or
So,
it could be small mom and pop, your convenience stores who go into Sam's Club at 7 o'clock in the morning.
well,
And
they can, yeah, but
they can do it because they have a merchant account. And
yeah,
they go in and they take
they
part.
got better deals when they bought it from a they bought it from a private independent wholesaler that only did business in the city of Pittsburgh, and there's another one that
Right,
only did business in Buffalo.
right.
And
But
so
these days,
you're a local guy, you're buying from a local wholesaler, he's buying from places that, you know, might ship it a long distance, or he's buying it from a local mushroom farmer or whatever. It's all local to local to local.
all right, Daniel,
Walmart's retailers buy it from Walmart warehouses, which buy it from directly from the manufacturer. And they haven't cut out the middleman. They put the middleman internal to their corporation. The marketing advantage, though, you know, one of the monopolies that it's becoming less important and new monopolies are arising is that the broadcast monopoly centralized these businesses for a long time. Now we have Amazon, and there used to be a rule, and Henry George was responsible for making this rule happen. The guy who owned Western Union, whose name was Ezra Cornell, who started Cornell University, he went into a partnership with Associated Press, and he tried to give the member newspapers in California, if you weren't a member of Associated Press, you could not get any news from back east, because Western Union would only deliver news for Associated Press members. And Henry George ran it or worked for an independent newspaper, and he went east, and he tried to, he got away with it for a little while, but he would send encrypted messages by Western Union to somebody that would sell them to the independent newspapers in the West. And they eventually shut that down too. And a bunch of things like that happened. Standard Oil got the railroad companies to give them better prices on oil, on transporting oil than the competitors were getting. And he required not only that he get a good price, he required them to charge the competitors more.
right. You have a couple more comments.
Okay, let me finish this. The antitrust laws that came out of this was that if you're a common carrier, you have to charge everybody the same. Well, now we have FedEx and UPS, which are common carriers, and even the post office giving Amazon and eBay lower prices than anybody else gets. So these common carriers have a monopoly advantage, and they're networking that advantage to give Amazon and eBay that advantage, and it's at the expense of independent vendors. Go ahead. What was the next?
We have Daniel who commented on the post office, and Jonathan had a comment, and Ed had a comment. If you look over your comment section. Okay. Did you see those?
Let's see. Do they appear at the top?
They should be, yeah. There's
Is the
Daniel.
most recent one at the top or at the bottom?
Let's see. If let me read you, Daniel. If the post office wanted to compete with the internet, they would just offer free mail delivery or in exchange for letting them read and use everything you write, right? And
well, free mail delivery would be a subsidy to Amazon, and it would be a subsidy to the mail order businesses at the expense of the brick and mortar businesses.
But there was rural free delivery, RFD, back in the 30s, where people actually, instead of going to the post office, got their mail delivered.
Yeah, I kind of question whether that was a good idea, but
Hey,
it
I
was.
don't have to go to a post office. But then Jonathan commented, land in the economic definition includes atmosphere. Privacy isn't land. And then I've got a comment from
Well, privacy isn't land. I don't know what that means, but
and then Ed has a comment about South Jersey.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, Trader Joe. Now Trader Joe's is interesting because Trader Joe's emphasizes service. So they have, you go into Trader Joe's, there's a lot of employees, and they compete by having a very small. They're very land efficient in that they only carry things that turn over quickly. So while Whole Foods has close to 100,000 different items in their shelves, Trader Joe's has about 4,000. So there's only 4,000 things you can buy at Trader Joe's, and they turn over very quickly, and that's how they make their money. It's unclear whether labor efficiency is a good thing or not. When there are people suffering from long-term unemployment, it's a bad thing. When everybody's got a job and they all wish they could have longer vacations, then labor efficiency is a wonderful thing. So, yeah, the labor efficiency has more to do with forced idleness than it does with people just not having. And stick-built appreciates more. Yeah, that's true. But that's partly because the prefab homes tend to be in poorer neighborhoods to begin with. So poorer neighborhoods tend to go downhill. And if you have new houses being built in a neighborhood for people that are not as rich, it's more likely to go downhill than uphill. Yeah, this small business administration is is bureaucratic. I think the small business administration has an impossible task because the really small businesses don't have time to find out what the small business administration has to offer. Going to a government bureaucracy for help is a gamesmanship thing, and the real the self-reliant attitude that dominates the best of small businesses isn't interested in finding out what the Small Business Administration can do for them. I think that's very much the issue with why when we try to help small business, we actually end up hurting them. One of the things the sales tax might even be worse for small business than the payroll tax. Or than the income tax. I don't think it's worse than the payroll tax. But for a company, doesn't pay any income tax till it turns a profit. So when you have a brand new business, you have somebody trying to enter the market, he has to generate sales taxes immediately. And so if Walmart can be a little bit cheaper and the sales tax is magnifying the price advantage, that small business is up against that. Where if you have an income tax, that small business at least has no taxable income, usually for 5 to 7 years, that the small business is just building up its volume and paying back its debts. So people talk about income tax as if it was bad for small business. No, income tax is not nearly as bad for small business as sales taxes. And they also have to calculate the tax on every product and stuff. The bigger the business you are, the more automated your tax systems are. That's becoming less of a problem. We've gotten to the point where everybody's automated. But for the longest time, the nuisance costs of calculating taxes was deadly to small business. Even if the tax was trivial, you know, you have a local mercantile tax of 1/10 of 1%. Yeah, small businesses tend to have shorter hours. Big business closes. Big business, you know, there are 24-hour Walmarts. That has to do with people being overworked so they can't shop during normal hours. It has to do with Walmart paying the absolute minimum wage. It has to do with people being so desperate for a job that they will work in the middle of the night. And I'm sure there's some differential. I'm sure if Walmart is paying the absolute minimum wage, that they'll pay you another 25 or 50 cents an hour to work in the middle of the night. But that only happens when people are desperate for a job. And part of this is a self-perpetuating thing. When you become labor efficient, you hire few people. When you hire fewer people, people are desperate for a job. When they're desperate for a job, they'll work for less. So maybe you'll hire a few more people, but they also are more price conscious. So the people who are making a minimum wage and are working for Walmart, they're also the people who are shopping at Walmart, because people who make a good wage don't have to shop at Walmart. They will shop. Their time is valuable. They'll pay more money, get their product quicker. You have a self-perpetuating system that really benefits big business at the expense of other people. And there are some big businesses that I didn't talk about at all because they have their own monopolies. Right-of-way monopolies. If Comcast and Verizon have cable TV franchise monopolies, they have, you know, cell tower monopolies, or maybe are not quite as total a monopoly, but there's a limited number of people that can have those monopolies. 5G is a network of satellites orbiting around the Earth. The fixed cost of having that network of satellites is really the cost. The individual cost of transmitting your message is trivial. So a small company could never compete with Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint on their 5G satellite orbiting systems.
Shall
I guess that's all.
Oh wait, well, there's a Q&A. There's somebody had. Okay, explain why the sales tax is worse for goods with rapid turnover.
Oh no, it's not worse for particular types of goods, I don't think. Well, it's worse for goods with a low markup, because the ratio of sales tax to your, you know, if I'm only making, you know, if the market will allow me to sell a large volume of things at a low markup, then the ratio of the tax to the markup is burdensome. A jeweler who is maybe getting a 40% markup on his earrings, you know, he sells them very slowly, but when he sells them, he gets a 40% markup on them. The sales tax doesn't eat into his profits very much. So sales tax tends to, and it's the same thing, Henry George pointed this out with tariffs, that you can't levy a tariff. If you levy a tariff on gold or diamonds, people will just smuggle the gold and diamonds. But if you levy a tariff on coal or bricks or food or something, it's very difficult to smuggle that, because it's very bulky for the same amount of value. So you can't sneak. You can easily sneak $1,000 worth of diamonds past a immigration official, but you can't sneak $1,000 worth of cheese past an immigration official. So, so tariffs had that unique thing that the cheaper it was, the easier it was to put a tariff on it. Sales tax is usually on everything, or else it's on everything except food and clothing. And that gets weird because, you know, it's not on food. Well, it's not on lobster and caviar. It's not on clothing. It's not on Armani suits. Some places tried to say, well, if a suit costs more than $200, we're going to put a tax on it. So they just learned to sell the pants and the vest and the jacket separately, and each one was under $200. So they avoided the tax that way. Most taxes create a lot of arbitrary workarounds, and land value tax does not. So you can't haul your land to the Cayman Islands.
Thanks to the Robert Schockenbach Foundation for helping us out. We're glad to see that we have a few of their board members on staff, including their president. So we're happy that you're here and happy that you're helping us out, because Dan, there is an overhead to doing this. Even though Dan and I do it as labors of love, there's still a cost. So we really appreciate it.